Recording in progress.
Welcome to the City Council special meeting this Monday evening on May 1st. I now call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Hedges.
Here.
Councilmember Lorraine.
Here.
Councilmember Newsom.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Diaz-Nash.
Here.
Mayor Lee.
Here. We're excited to be here in person with options for those who choose not to be in person to participate virtually. There are several ways to participate. For those attending in person, please complete a yellow request to speak slip and hand it to our city clerk. If participating remotely, use the raise your hand feature in Zoom and you will be called on at the appropriate time. If calling in via phone, press *9 to raise your hand, and when called upon, press *6 to unmute. These options for public comment will remain available until I close the public comment period for each specific item. We'll begin with the first of two items on the agenda, which will be a study session. Item 1 is solid waste rate setting introduction and overview, and we have a presentation from Jack Johnson, possibly musical, maybe not, our waste management supervisor.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Jack Johnson. I am the Waste Management Supervisor for the city. Our rate-setting consultants, Rick Simonson and Gabe Sasser, are also here with us virtually. The purpose of our presentation is to introduce you to the solid waste program, what we do, and how it is funded. Tonight we will discuss the following: the solid waste program and what it does, the solid waste rate setting and the Proposition 218 notification process, our cost of service implementation plan, and other elements of how we create our rate structures. We will go over the timeline for future meetings for the 2024 rate setting. There will be time for questions and discussion, but this is primarily an introduction to the program and rate setting to prepare you for the work that will come later this summer and fall when we will establish the 2024 rates. The solid waste program. Most of the work of the solid waste team is managing waste diversion, keeping things out of the landfill and recycling valuable resources such as paper, glass, metal, cardboard, and organics. When we properly manage our waste, we reduce litter, recover valuable resources, and help reduce the production of greenhouse gases. The Solid Waste Fund also includes our other litter reduction programs, the trash capture programs that prevent trash from going into the bay, all of the city's street sweeping and the public outreach and education we do, and our e-waste collection and shredding events and the costs for landfill closure. We have two partners, the South Bayside Waste Management Authority, also called Rethink Waste. This is a joint powers authority that runs the Shoreway Environmental Center. This JPA, of which we are a member, covers all of the jurisdictions between Burlingame and East Palo Alto, except Atherton. And as you probably know, the Shoreway Environmental Center is a transfer station to which all of the rubbish, recycling, and compost collected in our service area is brought to and either processed there on site or is trucked away for processing or disposal. And our other partner is Recology, which is our rubbish, recycling, and compost hauler. They are responsible for collecting all the material and bringing it to the transfer station. They are also responsible for sending out bills, collecting the fees, and sending them back to us. We have a franchise agreement with them that expires in 2035. The solid waste rates that account holders pay is the funding mechanism that pays for all of this collection, processing, and disposal, plus the cost of the city's street cleaning program, all of the work of the solid waste program, capital project improvement fees for our trash capture efforts, franchise fees, and the landfill closure fee. The total costs of the program last year were about $29 million. You will see a more detailed breakdown of that later in the discussion, or the presentation rather. So what does this mean for you as the governing body? Each year, the City Council is required to review and adopt the solid waste rates. We do this through a series of meetings, including public hearings during the summer and fall. The rates then become effective on January the 1st of each year. Our consultants will go into more explanation in a few minutes. A few years ago, the previous council approved a phased-in cost of service implementation plan so that all ratepayers would be paying for the true costs of the service they receive. Currently, residential customers do not cover their actual costs. Commercial accounts largely do. How did we get to that situation, you might be asking? Well, in 2006, in order to promote recycling and to reduce waste going to the landfill, San Mateo, like many progressive communities, adopted a pay-as-you-throw system. But in the intervening years, California didn't meet its landfill reduction targets established by law, so in 2016 and 2022, new regulations from the state came into effect, mandating recycling and composting for both residential and commercial. Neither is voluntary for anyone in the state any longer. Further, out of an abundance of caution, the city follows the requirements of Proposition 218, a citizen-led state ballot initiative. Between Proposition 218 dictates and mandatory recycling and composting, the city's ability to encourage recycling and composting through a progressive rate structure has been eliminated. However, there is still a financial incentive for residents to generate less waste. So even though we can no longer use the pay-as-you-throw model and must transition to a true cost of service model, it is still a fact that the city has long been and remains committed to waste reduction and diversion, but regrettably, because of the state laws, we are no longer able to fund our waste, recycling, and composting programs in the way we had been. So what do we need to do? I apologize. Over time, we need to increase rates for those service levels not covering their cost of service. Unfortunately, since it is those customers producing the least waste who have received the highest incentives over the past 15 years, they are the ones who now require the most adjustment. And accordingly, rates have been raised the last 2 years to initiate the transition. On the bright side, previous councils have approved building up a reserve fund, over $9 million currently, that council can use to cushion the blow as much as is practical while maintaining a healthy fund balance. However, we now have to begin to actually use the reserve fund. We need to use it to pay for the choice not to raise rates during the pandemic and to cover the cost to phase in the cost of service plan. Our consultants will explain this in more detail too. So instead of just telling you that our consultants will explain all of this soon, I think I should turn it over to them to actually do that. Tonight we have with us Rick Simonson, Senior Vice President of HF&H Consultants, and Gabe Sasser, the Project Manager for HF&H. They are here to walk us through some of the finer points of this complex topic. HF&H have been an excellent partner over the past few years in helping the city set our rates, understand the changes to the solid waste landscape, and in helping us continue along a healthy track. I do want to caution you about the numbers you're about to see. These projections and numbers are simply placeholders. We are still waiting for final numbers from Ecology and the SBWMA, and we will have updated numbers for you at our next meeting in July. Rick, please proceed.
Good evening. Again, I'm Rick Simonson with HF&H Consultants. In the next 10 slides or so. I'll just walk through kind of the high level of what you can expect as we embark on the 2024 rate setting process that will really begin in earnest in June. So let me set the stage first to remind you of how you currently charge your customers. First, the single family and multifamily dwelling units with up to 4 units, they are charged based on the selected service level of the solid waste refuse container, ranging from a 20-gallon cart up to a 96-gallon cart that is collected weekly. All of these service levels also include a 64-gallon recycling cart and a 96-gallon organics cart that is also collected weekly. Residents may, if they need, can have additional recycling and organics carts for an additional charge. So these are the base rates for weekly service for all 3 material types. Next slide, please. Focusing on your commercial and those multifamily dwelling units in excess of 4 have a slightly different rate schedule in that many of these businesses and multifamily, they have dramatically varying needs based on how much refuse, recycling, and compost or organic materials that they need collected each week. So they are also provided the choice of carts, but in addition, you can have cubic yard bins, compactors, or larger roll-off boxes. And these containers can be collected up to 7 days per week. These rates shown on the right-hand side do include a 64-gallon recycling cart for every commercial multifamily dwelling. They also may request additional carts, but there are additional charges if needed. And currently, organic service is charged separately, not built into the rates you see on the right, and they're offered a 25% discount. But within our cost of service rate studies, we'll be looking now that we have mandatory organics collection for all businesses and multifamily dwellings, of bringing forth a rate for organic service that does not have a discount, so they pay their true cost of service. Next slide, please. The steps of a cost of service rate study are outlined here. First, we need to determine, well, how much revenue do you need to generate from your rates? And we call this the revenue requirement. We will compare that to the current revenues at current rates. So we look at the subscriptions of all the customers within the service area and get the total revenue that will be derived if rates remain the same. We compare those projected revenues to the projected revenue requirement and determine if there's a surplus or a shortfall. We will then develop a strategy if there's a shortfall for bridging that gap between revenues and expenses. I'll walk through a couple of the options that we looked at last year. You can solely bridge that gap by raising rates, or as Jack mentioned, the city has established a reserve, so those monies are available to help cushion that shortfall. Or if there's any alternative funding sources such as grants or other non-rate revenues that may help in that effort. And then lastly, as Jack mentioned, the Proposition 218 requires each rate to cover their costs on each service level. So we'll get into how we design those rates and make sure we're generating sufficient revenues to cover all costs. Next slide, please.
Rick, just a reminder, we have a big agenda tonight, and we need to make sure that we're keeping to time. Thank you.
So as Jack mentioned, I'll just cover these, and if there's questions at the end, we'll be happy to answer them. As Jack mentioned, $29 million. Again, this was for our 2023 rate setting. It's made up the 3 components that have been discussed. Recology makes up just over half of the revenue requirement, And Recology will be submitting their 2024 request for compensation this June 15th. That will really kick off the proceedings of understanding your true expenses. In addition, the SBWMA, about 8.2 million last year. In addition, the city has their expenses for street sweeping, the solid waste programs, landfill closure expenses. All these components add up to $29 million for the last year. We compared that to the revenues and we knew some sort of rate increase was necessary. Next slide, please. The options available to the council, as I've already mentioned, so I'll go through quickly on this slide. You can increase rates, which will have a significant increase in the first year, or you can use reserves to help soften that. If you exclusively use reserves, that would be a short-term fix and you would quickly deplete your reserves. So as recommended and brought forth last year is a combination of rate increases and use of reserves. Next slide, please. We start all discussions with understanding what that shortfall may look like. So this graph you'll see at the next meeting where we look at the expenses, that's indicated by the stacked bar charts. And then we compare that to the revenue at current rates, which is indicated with that solid black line. And we see expenses exceed revenues over the next 5-year projection period in this case. We will also bring forth the reserve balance, and that's indicated with the red line there. At the beginning of the process last year, I had about 9.4 million in reserves. And you can see, as indicated here, reserves would be depleted before the end of fiscal year in 2027 if no rate increases are approved. Next slide. Just quickly, I won't go over this in too much detail, but you may have noticed on that previous slide, there was a solid blue line, which is our reserve balance target. We would like to keep the reserves above that blue line. And though there is no official solid waste fund reserve policy, for utility rate making in the water, sewer, and solid waste, typically that reserve is set at a 1.5 times the frequency of billing, which in your case, Recology bills monthly. So we'd like to see 6 months of operating expenses as your minimum reserves. I'll also mention this last bullet point here, subsequent to last year's decision to keep that at 6 weeks of total costs. There's been some discussion and a recommended minimum target of about 50% of the city only operating expenses, which is about 2.5 million. It's about $1 million less than looking at the total. Next slide, please. As we move through the rate setting process, we look at many options, and in this case, 3% annual increases and what that would do to your reserve balance. So this is an interactive process. As you change those recommended revenue increases, you see the red line does go down, however, stays above that target blue line. So this is indicating the combination of rate increases and use of reserves as the reserves are going down towards the 5th year of the rate setting process. So the process forthcoming for 2024, we expect to do the same, a combination of those revenue increases and the use of reserves. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, Proposition 218 says fees and charges must be proportional to the cost of providing service. So in this case, if we need a 3% revenue increase, historically, you may just increase all rates by 3%. But we will go through the cost of service analysis to really determine which rates need to change by which percentages to align them each with the true cost of service. Some rates will need to go up more than 3%, and some would be something less. That cost of service will be conducted later this year with the projected 2024 expenses. Next slide. This is just a snapshot of what we saw last year in setting 2023's rates. On the top there, you see the difference where residential cost of service was not meeting the current rates. So you see some large differentials for the smaller 20 and 32 gallon. And then slowly, by the time you get to 96, a little bit less of an impact. And for commercial multifamily, the small containers weren't meeting their cost of service, but the large was. We've also indicated after the rate adjustments, we're still seeing that same pattern, but again, this is a phase-in process where you see the 2023 rates, those differentials have dipped a bit, and we plan on keeping with this phase-in if that is a direction by the council for the forthcoming rate setting process. Next slide, please. This is just a summary of the 5-year outlook. 5 years worth of rates was not adopted, but this is included here to illustrate how this is phased in. And for the smaller containers, 20 and 32, as you see on line 1 and 2 there, we were projecting $4 increases, while on lines 3 and 4, you see 64 and 96 gallons had something smaller because they were closer, if not above their cost of service. And I'll also mention on line 13 and 14 for 2023, you see there was no adjustment to the commercial bins or the roll-off. Again, as we noted, the commercial and roll-off rates had met their cost of service, so no adjustment was necessary.
Thank you, Rick. We will go into more detail later in the year, and you'll get a lot more thorough an understanding of this. This slide simply shows you where we compare here in the orange with our other sister cities in the SBWMA. And I just want to add that all of the member agencies and basically every jurisdiction in the state is involved in this process and trying to get the rates up to their true cost of service. This is for 20-gallon residential. This is 32-gallon residential. And we are well below the average and below the highest. The timeline coming up is that we will get new numbers in June, and HF&H will update the model. And then in July, we will have another study session to review the updated model and present to you the preliminary results for what we are going to recommend for the 2024 rate setting. In September, we have another City Council presentation where we request the authorization to mail the 218 notices. And then in November, after a 45-day protest period, we have a public hearing at which the public may protest. And if 50% of the ratepayers plus one protests, then the rates wouldn't become effective. Otherwise, they will become effective on January the 1st. That concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time and patience. If there are any questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
Thank you so much for the thorough presentation. This is the time for questions. Councilmember Hedges.
Thanks for the examples on half of the cans. Could you give me an indication, which I think would be more for single-family homes and for commercial property, the 64 or 96, where we stand with those?
For the cost of service?
Well, for the cost of service plus for our standing with the rest of the communities as far as where we land.
Oh, I'm sorry. We will have to prepare that and bring that back to you.
Because I'm guessing, but I think I'm right, that the smaller cans are probably less frequently used.
No, sir. It is the case that 20 and 32 gallons are the most
really
sought after,
okay.
At least for garbage.
And my mistake. Thank you.
But I'll demonstrate that visually for you.
Okay, thank you.
July.
That's it.
Any other questions from council?
Excuse me. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I'm interested in, I saw the, can you go to the, I guess here, the rate increase proposed for the next period for what, 2024? And how much were the rate increases previously. So if an individual family or a home is seeing X, if they're at all aware, how does that relate to the increases that they've seen in the past?
I'm going to defer to our consultants for that question.
Okay.
Rick, can you answer that?
Mr. Simonson,
Had
please
to get
unmute.
unmuted, my apologies. So I don't have in front of me the historical increases, but I do recall in 2022 and then 2023, $4 increases to the 20 and 32 gallon containers for the last 2 years, as well as 64 and 96 were held at the $2. That's as far back as I can recall at the time.
Okay, thank you. And then I think my next question is more of a supposition. Maybe Azalea, you might be the best person for me to ask this. I'm looking at this and hearing that conceptually it's the people who have been the best in terms of not putting waste out that are going to be suffering or getting the biggest increases. And is that something we need to be thinking about as we move toward, excuse me, electrification and people using their own electricity or solar or wind? I know PG&E has said that as there are fewer and fewer people using less and less, their rates are probably going to go up and up. So is that a fair, I see there's some analogy between these two things, that people who are trying very hard not to deliver waste and not to use too much electricity or gas are maybe suffering, at least short term, the biggest consequence. Is that fair?
Well, we can say that the cost of service adjustment reflects the true costs. So the intent is for us to adjust to make sure that people do pay based on what they produce, whether it goes to the landfill or whether it gets composted. You are correct that there are economies of scale savings as it relates to having 3 Recology trucks reach a single family home versus an apartment building. So there is the larger amounts do get, or the cost of service is less overall because the baseline costs are high. So there is an economies of scale that you see the effect with just in terms of efficiency as it relates to picking up one bin versus a larger bin for a larger household like high density housing.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess I would just put out there in the universe that as we look at new things, different types of energy or waste or who knows what it is in the future, we should think and remember this so that we incent people in a way that they won't ultimately feel a greater burden from. That's all. Thank you.
Through the mayor. Mr. Johnson, can you just maybe confirm for me, I feel like I'm getting the sense through the presentation that over the last couple of years, council has decided to pursue a hybrid path to rate increases by both increasing the rates some amount, but also drawing on our reserves. And would you say that it's about this sort of 3% that you were showing in the model, and that's the current trajectory we're on?
That is the motivating idea behind the phased-in cost of service, to rely on reserves to ease in those increases instead of having them happen all at once, which would have been like a $40 a month hit to some of the lower ratepayers to get them from where they were to where they ultimately have to be. The use of reserves hasn't actually happened yet, and that's one of the things that's going to be brought to you this summer, is how much of our reserves do we wish to use to affect the change that previous council and this council will want to implement.
And do you recall why we haven't used reserves yet? Can you maybe just help me understand?
I do not know the answer to that question. I've only been here a year. I mean, the practical answer is we didn't request the actual use of it. It was just authorized that we were going to rely on reserves, from what I understand.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that.
Well, to actually use reserves, we have to bring some legal mechanism before the council to actually approve, and that we haven't done that yet, but we will be bringing that to you to consider this summer.
I see. Okay, thank you.
It isn't. I don't cut the checks. I mean, it doesn't happen as easily as we might think, I guess.
And we can clarify that at the future meeting, because
Yes.
during COVID, we did 0% increases because of the challenges that we had during COVID. So, but we'll get back to you on what we've done in the past as it relates to the use of reserves and increases.
Okay, thank you. No further questions at this time.
Thank you. Now is the time to open this up for public comment. Madam Clerk, do we have any commenters?
I have no speaker slips on this item, the solid waste rate setting introduction. If you do want to comment and you're in the council chamber, please bring your speaker slip up right now. And for virtual attendees, remote, please raise your hand at this time if you want to comment on the solid waste rate setting introduction item. We have one in-person commenter.
Good evening, Council. It's one of my first meetings on municipalities.
Wait, that's not.
Is his
Hold on
mic
one
on?
moment. Yeah. We'll start you over here.
Go ahead.
I know there are other municipalities that tend to, some bill it annually on the property tax bills. So I'm wondering if there's a potential of at least saving some transaction costs there, because I think most are billed either monthly for commercial or quarterly for residential. Because if we can cut down transaction costs, then maybe we don't have to raise rates so high. And also, I know, living in multifamily, a lot of neighbors like to use our dumpsters for their bigger items, and it just would be great to have more communication with the big bulky item pickups, so people don't come to larger dumpsters and use them. Thank you.
Thank you. That are all the speakers.
Thank you. And with that, we'll close the public comment. This is the time to deliberate and give council direction. Would anyone like to start? Go ahead, Councilmember Hedges.
Well, as I heard, correct me please, and thank you, that we really only have two ways to go here. We can decide to implement the full rates, or actually three, or use some of the reserves to soften it, or the third choice would be to not implement the increases and watch our reserves completely diminish.
There would be a fourth choice, which would be a combination of raising rates and reserves.
Okay. I would probably at this point be in favor of the combination. People have really suffered a lot during the meltdown of the economy that's happening right now. Maybe that's a little overstatement. Also with the pandemic. And if we can soften it in any way, especially in the near years, I think that would be good.
I would agree with Councilmember Hedges that the combination would be the way I'd be interested in going.
Yes, I concur. I think it seems to me that the more recent plan that was adopted last year with this hybrid approach makes sense. I think it makes sense to me to put reserve funds to help soften the blow, especially during these times of these increases, while still making sure we do increase eventually to reach cost of service. So I look forward to the real numbers and diving a little more deeply in shortly. Thank you.
I also concur. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm aligned with the rest of the council on this. We did not increase rates during COVID, and I think that was the right thing to do at the time. There's a part of me that wants to explore a lower rate increase given the rate of inflation right now. So if there's a way to factor that into a more long-range rate increase plan that works in combination, then I think that's worth looking into, if council's pleasure is to do so. I wanted to elevate the question that came from our community member about transaction costs. And so, are we looking at all options for efficiency? I know that we're not directly billing because these are through partnerships. And so, can you just speak to that in terms of the due diligence on getting the lowest possible transaction costs?
We will study that and bring that back to you.
Thank you so much. Do you have everything you need from us?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, we are ready to move on to our next item, which is our 101 Peninsula Avenue Interchange Improvements and Project Update. Looks like we have a presentation from our senior engineer, Bethany Lopez. Thank you, Bethany.
Good evening, Council. My name is Bethany Lopez. I'm the Senior Engineer in the Public Works Department. Tonight I'm going to provide an update on the US 101 Peninsula Avenue Interchange Project. So I'm going to provide a quick overview of the project, including the purpose and need of it, discuss the options that we've been currently evaluating, also discuss the project cost, including the right-of-way needs for the project, as well as the construction costs, and then discuss the options for next steps. So the project proposes to relocate the existing southbound freeway ramps from East Poplar Avenue to Peninsula Avenue. And the reason for this is to improve safety in the project vicinity, improve travel times by reducing congestion, and to accommodate future traffic volumes. And I'll dive into each one of these. So some of the direct need for the project has to do with the design of the Poplar Avenue ramps. They were constructed in the 1950s using a button hook design, which now have substandard deceleration and acceleration lengths. This lends to some of the high vehicle speeds exiting the freeway onto Poplar Avenue, as well as freeway congestion challenges with vehicles not having sufficient length to get to freeway speeds prior to merging with the traffic. It also lends to traffic queuing and congestion in the area in the immediate vicinity. Poplar Avenue, as a two-way roadway, has single-family, multifamily, and school uses fronting it within a quarter mile from these ramps. And it was not designed to accommodate the traffic that it's seeing today, nor will it be able to accommodate the traffic in the future. This image shows the collisions from the last 5 years. Where we see larger dots, it indicates a greater number of collisions or a greater concentration of collisions in these locations. You can see the largest dot in this location is at Poplar Avenue and Humboldt. Delaware, Humboldt, and Poplar have all been listed on roadways in CCAG's youth-based high-injury network. And so that speaks to some of the challenges that we're having with some of the volumes in the area. And then looking at the project's context in the vicinity between Broadway and 3rd Avenue, Poplar Avenue provides one of the only southbound, or the only southbound access to and from local streets. And in contrast, in the northbound direction, there's 3 ramps for the northbound traffic. This limited access, along with the roadway characteristics that I just mentioned on Poplar Avenue, have contributed to some of the safety issues that we're seeing in the area. As I'll discuss, it'll lead to some substantial congestion challenges in the future. As we see in the lighter orange color, the relocated ramps to Poplar Avenue would create another full access ramp in the vicinity. With Poplar Avenue being a 4-lane roadway between Humboldt and Bayshore with no fronting uses in that section, it's anticipated to better accommodate current and future traffic volumes in the area. So we know that traffic congestion in the area is already an issue. In the image that you see here, which was taken in 2020, we can see that there's already delays that back up in the vicinity of the Poplar Avenue ramps. So it's not infrequent to see southbound queues on Humboldt Avenue extending beyond the turn pocket as they make their way towards the Poplar Avenue ramps. And similarly, in the eastbound direction on Poplar Avenue, we see delays. We've also completed an extensive traffic analysis for the project, and that includes some forecasting of future traffic volumes. That's done utilizing proposed growth in the areas. And so what we're looking at here is queues for the afternoon peak hour in year 2025. And this is if the ramps are not relocated, so if they remain at Poplar Avenue. So what's shown in this image is red lines that show both the location and the extent of traffic queues. So this is actually representing the length of the congestion or the length of the queues on the approach to each one of the intersections in the area. Similarly, the image shows traffic congestion in 2045 if the ramps remain at Poplar Avenue. We do see some extensive congestion along Poplar Avenue that extends from the ramps all the way down towards San Mateo Drive. We similarly see traffic congestion in the north-south direction as folks make their way towards the Poplar Avenue ramp. So southbound on Delaware, southbound on Humboldt, northbound on Humboldt, also northbound on Delaware. So in order to address these issues, 2 project alternatives were developed. The first of these is the spread diamond alternative. We do have larger images of these available in the agenda packet. The spread diamond alternative proposes southbound ramps that are approximately 300 feet west of North Bayshore. We also note that the alignment of the southbound ramps requires right-of-way both north and south of Peninsula Avenue. And you'll see in purple in the sort of left-right direction on this, which is north-south, the realigned Amplet Boulevard follows the current alleyway path, and it's proposed as a 2-way roadway. The second alternative is the tight diamond. In this alternative, the ramps are proposed approximately 250 feet west of North Bayshore, so about a 50-foot difference between the ramps in these 2 alternatives. We'll discuss some of the benefits of this in just a moment, but what we see here is that shift of about 50 feet allows for the structure just south of Peninsula Avenue, the Bayview Apartments, to be avoided by the ramp alignment. And so in this alternative, there's a potential to maintain the Bayview Apartments in their current location. However, the realigned Amplet Boulevard, as you see again in the sort of left-right configuration, north-south, would be reconfigured as a 1-way roadway, currently shown and proposed in the northbound direction. And part of that was proposed to help maintain as much of the right-of-way along the remaining parcels as possible. So we just saw this image. It represents the traffic congestion in 2045 if the ramps are not relocated. Some of the benefits, on the other hand, of the project, or if a project is constructed, is what we see here, which is substantially reduced congestion and improvements to the traffic in the area. We also anticipate safety improvements in the vicinity of the schools that are fronting Poplar Avenue. So I'm going to talk briefly about the project development process because we're going to talk a little bit about this in the project options. So the first process is the initial project planning process. What this does is identify alternatives to move forward into the next phase. There's also the environmental studies and preliminary engineering process, which we call the PAED, or Project Approval and Environmental Document. So you may have seen it referenced to that in the staff report. From there, we move into the project design. So this is your final full project design and specifications. And then in addition to that, this is the same time that you would work towards acquiring any necessary right-of-way for a project. Once those are completed, you would move into the construction phase. So I do want to note that between ending and starting a project, or excuse me, before starting another phase, funding must be identified for that next phase. So currently, as I'll discuss, we're in the PAED phase, or the environmental studies phase. We cannot move into the project design phase or the right-of-way acquisition phase until we identify funding for both, for either and both. So we are currently, we've completed the project initiation document in 2015. We're currently in the environmental studies and preliminary engineering, the PAED. We started this phase in 2016, and we completed an extensive traffic analysis and outreach for this in 2017 through 2021. And at that time, in 2021, we started the formal environmental document process. Through this, we have received comments on the scoping portion of this. Generally, as we move towards final environmental document approval and Caltrans approval of the project, where we would select a preferred alternative, we would also release the environmental document out to the public for additional comments before finalizing the environmental document. So as I mentioned, the design process and the acquisition process is dependent on completion of the previous processes and would be dependent on identification of funding, and similarly with construction. To date, we've held 10 public meetings. This includes a variety of community meetings, presentations to council, both city, San Mateo, and Burlingame, as well as a handful of focus meetings for various impacted parties related to the project. So getting into the right-of-way, we anticipate the need for various types of acquisitions. So a partial acquisition is where you might need just a piece of landscaping in a private property area, but we also do have inclusion of a handful of properties that would require taking a portion of a structure, in which case that portion of the structure would be rebuilt, so that cost is included here. A full acquisition, on the other hand, would require, as it suggests, the full sort of take of a property. So you can see that there's two differences between the tight diamond and the spread diamond, 15 partial acquisitions with the tight diamond, and 14 with the 14 full acquisitions with the tight diamond at an estimated cost of $97 million. The spread diamond, on the other hand, would require 19 partial acquisitions and 15 full acquisitions at a cost of $151 million. So to briefly talk about the historical costs for the project, the right-of-way in 2015 in the project initiation document, the right-of-way costs were $25 million and $37 million, respectively, for the tight diamond and spread diamond. We did see those costs jump up in the 2020 cost estimate in the PAED phase to $57 million and $71 million for overall total project cost potential of $120 million. We had taken a summary of this to council at that time and received instruction to move forward with the project. To date, however, we've received a more updated project cost estimate, and as mentioned, the right-of-way costs have increased substantially, nearly 2 times what we saw in 2020. And some of this has to do with some of the way that the right-of-way was estimated earlier on. It is atypical for the right-of-way to be as high as it is compared to the overall construction costs. And so the methodologies that have been used in the past to estimate the right-of-way costs generally aligned with other types of right-of-way acquisitions, but unfortunately, I think those were underrepresenting the overall cost that we were going to see for this. So as mentioned, or as we can see here, the overall project cost, including the design, right-of-way, and construction, is $170 million or so for the tight diamond alternative and $227 for the spread diamond alternative. All right, moving on to options for next steps. So in summary, the options for next steps are to continue with the current project. Another option is to add alternatives to this current project's analysis effort that would require less right-of-way acquisition and produce similar congestion benefits. The third option is to restart the process to identify these projects that would require less right-of-way again, and that may also produce similar congestion benefits. And then the last is to determine if congestion and safety can be addressed, like it says, either in the short term or the long term without having to complete an interchange project. And I'll dive into these in just right now. So for continuation of the current project, what that would recommend is that we move forward with completing the environmental phase that we're currently in. That would allow us to select a preferred alternative of the two alternatives that we have developed. And we would also need to develop a funding plan for next steps. And some of the reason for this has to do with the Measure A Highway Grant Fund that we had previously been awarded has been, it's not recommended to utilize that for the current project any longer. Similarly, the grant funding, the SMCTA Measure A grant funding may be challenging to acquire for the right-of-way for this project. And then further, any other grant funding would probably be challenging to acquire for this project as currently designed. So the development of the funding plan would help identify if and what grant sources may be available, to what extent they may be available for right-of-way acquisition costs, and make a determination on if the project is even feasible at that point. So after identification of funding, if we were to continue with this current project, it would take approximately 2 years to complete the design. It would take another 2 to 3 years to acquire any necessary right-of-way, but again, all of that is dependent on finding funding for the project. For the second alternative, as mentioned, this would identify additional alternatives that would substantially reduce, or ideally substantially reduce, the amount of right-of-way that's needed for it, and again would be similar in terms of its benefit for congestion in the area. We anticipate that this would take 1 to 3 years to complete. And as I was mentioning about that grant funding for the design phase, the TA has indicated that we would be able to reallocate the funding that we had previously been awarded for design to this effort. So we would shift that funding into the current phase that we're in. For option 3, which is to restart the project, it has a similar goal as option 2. And again, that goal would be to reduce congestion in the area and reduce right-of-way that's needed. This would take 4 to 6 years to complete. As I was describing that sort of flow chart, this would take us back to step 1. We'd have to restart that process all over again. We do think that new funding would need to be identified for this for both phases. However, the TA has indicated that they may be able to reallocate that funding, again, the design funding, to this effort if we wanted to restart the project. And then the last option is to complete another traffic analysis. However, noting that this analysis could be some of the outcome of options 2 and 3 to restudy these additional alternatives. We anticipate that if there is a non-interchange option identified, that any of those improvements would likely occur within the right-of-way, and therefore no additional right-of-way acquisitions would be needed. The challenge, one of the biggest challenges with this project, or with this option, is that our traffic analysis has indicated that most of the congestion issues are related to the ramps, specifically the poplar ramps. So while we may be able to identify operational benefits or infrastructure benefits, or improvements, it's unlikely that this option solely would address the substantial congestion challenges that we're expecting in the future. Also, if this were the recommendation on its own, because it's not a highway-specific project, we would not be able to seek the Measure A highway program funding for this, if it's on its own. So a summary of these, I'll try to run through this very quickly, is the description for these options is to either continue with the project, expand on the current work under Alternative 2, start a new project under Alternative 3, or conduct a local analysis only under Alternative 4. The funding, as mentioned, for Option 1, we would need to identify new funding for design, right-of-way, and construction, and it's unlikely the TA would provide funding for the right-of-way and the design funding under this option. Under Option 2, the design grant funding could be reallocated to this effort to identify these different alternatives. Similarly for Option 3, and then for Option 4, again, if that's on its own, the TA would not fund that using the highway grant program. Under Option 1 for right-of-way, we have an understanding that it would require 29 to 34 partial and full property acquisitions, and so moving forward with Option 1 would continue with those acquisitions that would be required for that. Options 2 and 3 have the potential to substantially reduce the amount of right-of-way that's needed. And then Option 4, again, alone would likely require no right-of-way. And the challenges for these are under Option 1, that grant funding is going to be challenging. It's going to be a substantial hurdle for us to move forward with this and potentially make the project infeasible. For Option 2, we anticipate that this will cause some additional delays, 1 to 3 years as mentioned. For Option 3, we know that there's going to be additional delays and there's a potential for increased costs associated with it. And then Option 4, as I described, being a non-interchange project, we don't anticipate that this will fully address the congestion issues in the area. With that, I'll take questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Bethany, for a very thorough presentation. And I know that we have community members and business owners in the room that have been in a state of purgatory for many years now, not knowing the outcome of what will be happening to their properties and businesses. And there's probably a lot more community members who are not represented in the room that have suffered, property damage, bodily harm due to the collisions in North Central. So with that, I'd like to open it up for council questions. This is the time for questions. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you to the mayor. Bethany, thank you very much. I have some just background questions for my own education. If the state previously said that Measure A funding was available for the project as it stands, what happened that now it's not appropriate?
The right-of-way costs, the update to the right-of-way costs have made it substantially more challenging to continue funding as it is. Also, the number of impacts to the businesses and homeowners in the area.
Okay, that was my guess. So in terms of option number 2, you said they might be willing to reallocate funding, but would there be enough reduction of impact in the right-of-way to make that realistic, or is that just an option we have on the table?
So they've indicated strong support for us to reallocate that funding. At this point, we have not worked to develop those alternatives that could reduce that right-of-way. We anticipate that will be one of the most substantial goals of any alternatives identification, is to reduce the amount of right-of-way that's necessary, particularly concerning the cost and obviously the community impact related to that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Let's see. I read in the staff report that the interim project that's on Poplar right now, and there was an analysis done, and it's had fairly positive impact on the traffic there, yes, and the safety?
Yeah, a lot of the impetus for that project had to do with collisions specifically at Poplar and Amplet related to a lot of the varying types of movements coming off of the freeway. We are seeing that there has been a substantial improvement in the collisions directly at that location. However, we are still seeing a substantial number of collisions in the vicinity. So Poplar and Humboldt is one of our highest pedestrian collision locations. As I mentioned in the presentation, Poplar, Humboldt, and Delaware are all identified on the high injury network, meaning that they have a higher than average collision rate.
So if we're very concerned, as we are, not only about vehicle collisions, but also people, bicycles, everything else, then it would seem that something between an option 2 or option 3 might be the more attainable. It's trying to get at the multiple goals. Am I interpreting that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Through the mayor, thank you. Thank you, Bethany, for your presentation. A couple questions. What percentage of this would consist of removing housing versus business units? Do you know?
In terms of the current option, I would need to do the math off my head. It would be, it's one parcel would be housing. The rest of them is commercial and business properties. So of the 29 and 34, in the spread diamond alternative, that one would require acquiring housing, one parcel of housing, which consists of, I don't have the number offhand, but anyway, sorry, it would require, it's a multifamily housing project, so it would acquire the entirety of that apartment building. Whereas the tight diamond alternative is only commercial parcels.
Okay. Have we looked at, this is a freeway overpass, freeway frontage road. Have we looked at the possibility of doing things like what Burlingame and Millbrae do, which is going up, so you could have, half the footprint but twice the height? And would that be potentially more expensive than buying all these properties outright, or would it potentially be less expensive? Do we know?
And the project does propose to go up with the ramp. So the project would actually bring the ramps or the interchange, the intersection to the current elevation of where Peninsula Avenue is at right now. So again, it would go up, but between the necessary GOR, so that's the angle between the freeway and the off-ramp, that you need, that's a requirement by Caltrans, and then the necessary elevation to actually, the distance to gain that elevation, we do see that it pushes into the private properties in that area.
The only other question was, have we observed the collision rates near other high schools to see if they compare? Because obviously a big part of the collision rate, or not a big part, but I would assume a percentage of that also comes from the fact that it's so close to the San Mateo High School.
We have not, but I'll just mention that again, Poplar and Humboldt is the highest in the city in terms of pedestrian collisions. So we've looked generally at other collisions in the city, and that one is coming out as the highest.
And also, I believe that we have one of the worst rankings of safe routes to school.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
Questions?
One quick one from me, thank you. Bethany, could you, I get the sense when I look at options 2 and 3 that they're fairly similar. And as was discussed in the presentation, option 3 would take longer because we'd be starting over. Could you maybe give me a sense of whether staff feels like what the pros of going with option 3 would be as opposed to option 2?
I think a fresh start primarily is really the benefit to option 3, starting the process over. I understand sort of the timeline challenges, especially as Mayor Lee indicated, for a lot of the property owners. So starting the process over may have some benefits to where they're not being identified right from the get-go as the potential to need their property. However, because we don't know what those alternatives are just yet, we can't say that they're not going to be re-identified in the next phase if we were to go with option 3.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
I have the shortest arms and the longest reach, so it takes a little while. Thank you for bearing with me. An excellent report. I've been following this project since its beginning. I sat as an advisor on the Measure A group in the county. And excuse me for saying this, but I've always thought this project was unlikely. There was a lot of community angst about it. It seemed like a bridge too far, if I can use the comment. I think probably number 3, out of no other alternatives that would work, might be the best way to go. It's definitely a needed project. Look at what's happening with the development along Airport Boulevard and people looking for a way to go south out of there. North Shore View is inundated with traffic at the end of the day. You know, it's just frustrating to me to see that we need to do this and not understanding how we're ever going to get it done and whether we're going to waste money trying to get it done. So out of frustration, I would see restart the process.
Wait, is there a question coming?
Good point.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty emotional about this actually because I've followed it so long. But do you see any other way other than 3 to get this done?
Yeah, we proposed option 2 as a way to utilize much of the existing analysis that has been completed to date and build on top of that. So instead of starting from scratch and starting all over again, we would do what's necessary to identify additional alternatives under option 2. And again, like I said, build on top of all of the existing analysis that has already been completed.
If I may. One of the points of clarification is we have undergone the environmental review process, and part of the next step was going to be identifying a preferred option. What option 2 does, it saves us some work in terms of the fact that some of the analyses have already been done, and then adds additional alternatives to that effort. So there is an ability for us to save on some of the analyses that we've worked on over the past few years and build upon them.
I have a follow-up question. So it seems like as time stretches on and we go through the environmental process, is there a point in the future, if we don't move forward to this, that the environmental process is no longer sustainable?
It's a good question, and I think we would need to take a look at the various alternatives, have a better understanding of how long the analyses are going to take, and then determine at that time if any of the analysis that we've completed to date would either need updating or to be redone completely. We do anticipate that we'll be able to build off of, as mentioned, a lot of the analysis that's already been completed. So again, rather than going back to square one or starting from scratch, we would be able to utilize that analysis that's already been done and either update or revise in a way, again, that doesn't require a full restart.
Yeah, so we're hopeful that we can use the process then if it goes on for a long time, the environmental study. Thank you.
My question is really kind of to help bottom line. You know, I think it sounds like there's some interesting questions coming around option 2 and option 3 from from the perspective of wanting to leverage the environmental analysis, the existing likely commitment of grant funding, and then also a more truncated timeline. Do we have any estimate for property owners or a timeline that we could provide to property owners in terms of how we scope the next several phases over the next year, several years, so that they can have at least a goalpost in mind? At this point, I'll know my property will or won't be within these borders. Is there anything like that we can that we can provide today to some of the folks in the room?
I think that if we continue with alternatives like in option 2 that contain properties or that have identified properties that would require acquisition, we would not be able to, I guess, quote, unidentify them until we finalize the current phase that we're in. And so that's one of the benefits for option 3, is that we would be able to restart that process. They would no longer be identified in a project. However, again, it does come with that uncertainty that we would perhaps re-identify some or all of these parcels again with future alternatives. So unfortunately, no, we can't provide any specific timeline. I think what we might be able to lend to is other alternatives that we're studying that may be more feasible or more likely than the current alternatives, but there won't be a definitive answer on, yes, you're acquiring my property, or no, you're not acquiring my property until the final documentation in this phase.
Understood. And I know that we don't want to be in a position where we're making commitments or determinations without going through the full process. But I think in all likelihood, it seems that a spread diamond is largely infeasible. And so even just being able to delineate the difference, or the delta between the tight diamond and the spread diamond, and calling out which of those properties and parcels would no longer be in consideration, or that there's a very small, minute chance that those properties would be pursued for what is it, the POW? So I guess I just, I want us to be really sensitive to providing information, as much clarity and information as we can up front, even if it's just with sort of the caveat of this is a highly unlikely scenario that your property will be acquired because there's no funding source. Of course, that, we could win the lottery, I guess, and who knows what could happen. But just giving folks some sort of reasonable information that they can at least make some decisions around.
Certainly. I think that there may be opportunity to work with the project development team. There is a process by which you would formally eliminate options. So that's something that we can take up again at the appropriate time and see if that's something that we can look towards doing.
Great.
One more question. I'm listening to Mayor Lee bring up some good points. I was wondering if we could consider eliminating the spread diamond, because it really is a lot more money and and takes a lot more property.
The challenges with the environmental review requires an evaluation of a number of options for the selection of the preferred alternative. But like Bethany said, we could go back to the development team to assess if there is a way. So if that is direction from you all, we will follow up. But at this point, the process does require options.
Okay, thank you.
With that, we will open it up for public comment.
Thank you. If you have not delivered you're in the council chamber, please deliver your yellow slip to me now. At this time, I have two speakers in the here in the council chambers, and we have 8 who have raised their hands online. Please raise your hands now. As it is 20 minutes till 7, when we have 10 speakers, I would recommend a 2-minute. Is council okay with a 2-minute timing?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Our first speaker in person is Kevin Simpson, followed by Gino Cosell.
Good evening, Council. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm Kevin Simpson. I live on Humboldt, about half a mile from the Poplar intersection and a little bit further from Peninsula. For the love of God, do not start over. Do not stop. We need to keep this project going. For every kid that walks, rides in their parents' car or their car, or in a bus, or who bicycles through there at the schools that are there now and the one that's about to get built there, we need to fix this disastrous, antiquated, horrible mess that we have. So please, don't stop. Find a way to keep momentum going. It's not the best news on costs, but I just want to make sure there's a voice in the room that says, let's not throw our hands up and get distracted. Let's keep going. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Gino Cosell.
Hello, council and staff. Thanks for this opportunity. It's Gino Kacha. I'm with James Kacha Plumbing. We're on Anfled Boulevard. And, I'm seeing this information for the first time on the 4 options. A lot of places have changed doing this. We've been consistently here, right? There was over 21 alternatives for this off-ramp when it had public comment, and we're all drawing on pieces of paper. This has been extensively reviewed about all the different options can do. Talk to the engineers, talk to the cities, talk to the people, the interested stakeholders, whether there's people that own businesses there or neighbors. This is extensively gone through. We bought the property after you guys closed chapters and said it wasn't feasible. In 2003, this came up. You guys said, okay, it wasn't gonna happen because of Peninsula Avenue. 2006, it came back. We bought the building shortly after it came back. And what happens now is if we push the reset button, you're gonna go back to the same thing. All the money and the studies we've done, you light that on fire. You guys spent a ton of money so far going through these 2 phases, had to find money each time to do that. And now there's that money you spend is a reset button. That's no longer available. It's only useful to you, right? Why press the reset button now? It's almost insanity, right? You hear from the public, it's an unsafe offer. We understood really quick. We're not in the path of progress. We need to be able to be okay with this right of way because
Thank you.
it needs to be able to do this off-ramp. I don't think it was fair to do it in 2 minutes, to be honest with you, because you're giving us a lot of new information, and I'm trying to get to the minds here, but you guys have a lot more history than just in this last little phase history we're talking about. Please go back and review what happened. I'm happy to talk to each one of you about what our history, and please be engaged and find out what's going on.
And I'm sure our council members will take you up on that.
Thank you. We're going to move to our remote speakers now. Lori Watanuki is the first to speak, and I will reset the clock.
Good evening, Mayor Lee and members of the City Council. My name is Lori Watanuki, speaking as an individual. Our concerns are with the traffic redirection and the impacts to 3rd and Humboldt, 4th and Humboldt, and 5th and Humboldt. We want to make sure that we're included in the scoping. 4th and Humboldt is at Los F, and 5th and Humboldt is at Los F, according to Hexagon in the Mid-Penn studies. Especially what's troubling is the truck traffic on Amplet between 2nd and Peninsula. We discussed this problem with Ron Munakawa way early in the history, and he suggested to write a letter to Bethany Lopez when Poplar is closed, the solution to connect Amplet into one street at Poplar and use the exit at 101 South at Peninsula Avenue. There are going to be cumulative impacts with the general plan and along with this 101 Peninsula interchange. So again, please study the impacts of 3rd, 4th, 5th at Humboldt with the closure of Poplar and also the high accident numbers at 3rd and 4th Avenue. And thank you for listening to our concerns.
Thank you. The next speaker is Cynthia Newton.
Hi, good evening, Council. My name's Cynthia Newton. I'm the president of the North Shore View Neighborhood Association. So I have a number of comments. First of all, Alt 1, are we only not, can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, we can.
Oh, sorry. Are we only not considering it as because of the funding? It seems that way, and I think it would be a shame to start over. I think that this is so needed. And my big question about funding is what's Burlingame's responsibility in this? I mean, they are building buildings over on the east side, office buildings, and they are flooding the area. So does Burlingame have to pay for part of this? It seems like they honestly should pay for most of this project. And again, I work over at Airport Boulevard. There's a building in construction right now. I know 2 more are in consideration next to the Hilton. And I believe there's at least 1 more down the street that are all going to be built soon. So I don't think we can wait. And it's true, all that traffic is going to come flooding down North Shore View, and we can't get out of our neighborhood. It's a safety issue. So we really hope that this goes forward. I don't know why we'd have to start over again. And I find it rather dismaying that that's kind of being discussed. Thank you.
Next speaker is Ashley Klein.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much for having this meeting, and congratulations on providing a great analysis, Bethany. I'm a resident of Burlingame, but I live a couple of houses off of Peninsula Avenue, and I have children who walk to school on foot. I have 4 points that I'd like to make. The first is that the project benefits as presented this evening seem very focused on the challenges at Poplar Avenue without a similar analysis of the potential negative impact on Peninsula Avenue and its surrounding areas, both in San Mateo, but also in Burlingame. So I think if there is sort of a reanalysis, having an honest look at what happens on Peninsula Avenue and the surrounding is important. Related to that, I noticed on the map that there were the San Mateo schools were listed, but the Burlingame schools, which includes Washington Elementary School, the Pacific Rim International School, and the Genius Learning Daycare, were not noted on the map. My third point is just more of a question around the collision analysis. I wonder if it might benefit from some additional data cuts, including which ones were vehicle versus vehicle pedestrian or vehicle bicycle, and also fatality analysis there, because I think that's very telling. And then my final point is just that I think that a redesign or changes at Poplar Avenue could potentially be considered to provide the additional optionality that's required for environmental review. So rather than exclusively evaluating changes at Peninsula and eliminating Poplar, what about trying to fix the Poplar Avenue ramp as well? Thank you.
Next speaker is Lynn.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi there, my name is Lynn Lenarden. I'm the owner of Alert Door Service, and I own the building as well for 29 years. This has been going on entirely far too long. You kept us in limbo for years now. It keeps our values, our property values lower because we're under threat of eminent domain. Also, too, the longer it takes, the more small parcels are being sold off for these massive housing units in San Mateo, Burlingame, all up and down the peninsula. By the time this gets done and you take our properties, we're not going to have anywhere on the peninsula to move to. So if it's got to be done, and I understand there's these traffic concerns, you got to get going. It's not fair to keep us all in limbo. I mean, I'm in my 60s now. I don't want to start moving all my stuff out when I'm 70. And I don't want a mortgage. I haven't had a mortgage for 27 years. And now I'm going to have to buy a bigger building that's going to cost more. So, and we're all in the same boat. All of the small businesses, Kacha, Ideal Landscape, you know, we're all family businesses. Almost every business that there is going to be taken are small family businesses that serve the community. So I kind of implore you guys to either, you know, do it or get off the pot, because it's really frustrating and exhausting. Thank you for your time.
No, I'm sorry. We don't clap in here. Thank you. Max Mottner is the next speaker.
Hey there, am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
Amazing, cool. I'm a resident off of Poplar, and I know the intersections along Poplar up to the freeway on-ramp. I think my household's car might have been in one of the photos that was in Bethany's slides, trying to get onto 101. This is an arterial that separates two of the biggest schools in our community. And I don't have anything prescriptive as far as the options that were presented, but I do want, you know, going forward, focus and attention paid to improving the traffic safety for our community's children on Poplar, where we have a freeway on-ramp situated between a high school and an elementary school, and that elementary school is going to become an elementary plus middle school soon. This project's been in the pipeline for nearly 30 years now, and I'm not confident that it'll come to fruition before the school gets built on the current site of College Park and Elementary. So just wanted to emphasize that this is really about our community's children. And while I appreciate the community members' comments from Burlingame about how this project would relocate some of these traffic issues to Peninsula and wouldn't necessarily alleviate all the traffic issues. This is a huge source of stress and risk to our community's children and parents and families, and really a blight on the neighborhood. Putting an arterial, there was a discussion a couple months back about increasing the speed limit on Poplar because of how high speeds people drive down it. So there's a lot of other topics that stem to this, and just want to emphasize that going forward, that this is a hugely important arterial road.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Hunt, followed by our last speaker, Henry. We are taking only commenters who raised their hand at the option to raise their hands. Thank you. Go ahead, David Hunt.
All right, thanks for taking my comment. I just want to note a few things. First, Peninsula is currently also on the CCAG Youth-Based High Injury Network. Inevitably, as other comments have mentioned, moving traffic to that street would decrease safety. I think that being said, Poplar should be closed. Once again, echoing others, like, there's new schools planned there. There's already huge schools there. It's just not a safe place to have high amounts of traffic. But we should keep in mind, as we're choosing between alternatives, that avoiding building more capacity on and off 101 is really the only knob we have to turn to keep safety at current levels. More capacity just means more traffic, more pollution, and unfortunately more injuries. That seems to align with where discussion had been going of lower cost in terms of acquisition, but keep in mind that that also impacts safety of the overall project of just total capacity means more traffic, more pollution, more injuries. One last comment, how others cross 101 should be considered in alternatives. Pedestrians and cyclists need to safely get across this huge river of cars that cuts through our community. Having those options on the table when we're choosing between alternatives would be very valuable to make a good decision moving forward. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker is Henry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm Henry Riggs from North Idaho Street. And I just wanted to call out some of the collateral issues related to this project. The biggest one for our neighborhood has been parking. We've been asking for relief for street parking for about 15 years. And unfortunately, what we got last year was instead the loss of 200 parking spaces. We have challenges like if you're not home by 4:30, you don't get to park within 2 lots of your residence, and you're lucky if you get that. To compromise the parking along Amplet for the major apartment building would inevitably cause more problem. But there's more than that. That major apartment building is the cause of several issues for our neighborhood, a very direct neighborhood issue in the 800 block. This is where you buy drugs, for example. The city does not hold hearings on whether or not drug laws should be enforced or whether there should be surveillance of a particular building. And finally, I have to note that $160 million is an awful lot to pay for a situation of having to wait 3 light changes in order to get on the freeway. I have sympathy because I wait those 3 light changes almost every day, and it's quite a comparison from 20 years ago after I bought the building and I could just go down North Idaho Street and turn left. But I think council needs to take a look at the overall project, and I hope will take a good look at the 800 block of the overall neighborhood with some consideration for the residents there. Thank you.
Thank you. That is our last speaker.
Thank you so much for the feedback from the community. In the interest of time, and because this project is literally in my near backyard, I wanted to share just a couple of experiences. I have neighbors that live in Wood Lake that actually will not send their kids unattended across the street, one street on Poplar, to College Park or to the preschool. When you as a parent don't feel safe for your kid who might be 10 years old to cross one street, there's something really wrong. And so I also heeded the pleas from the business owners that have been waiting in limbo for years. And I think that if we can provide them any kind of guidance in terms of getting some properties essentially eliminated so that they at least know where they stand as we go through this process, my strong preference would be to pursue option 2. Option 2 has an expedited timeline. It leverages the environmental studies and the analysis that we've already done, and there's funding for the design. For me, those reasons alone, providing some assurance to the business owners and also getting a project online as quickly as possible that could help reduce the collision rate in this community that has the worst rankings for safe routes to school. With my own kids, I witnessed a child in a collision in my neighborhood. So we, on council for 4 years now, we've had high schoolers coming to us and pleading with us, please fix this intersection. So we don't have time to waste. And so I asked council, do we have agreement about pursuing option number 2? Does anyone else want to chime in with direction?
I understand your comments about item 2. I did not focus on that because I just don't think it's going to happen that way. But I hear what you say, and I could actually, this is not going to be a lot of direction, but I could go either 2 or 3. So I'm good with either one.
Concur.
I also concur with option 2.
Great. Just under the wire. All right, Bethany, do you have what you need from us? Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, with that, we will end our special meeting. And do you need some time?
Need at least 5 minutes.
Okay, in 5 minutes, we'll reconvene with the regular meeting.